Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science, Facts, and Fallacies podcast. I am Cameron English. Normally, I'm joined by Dr. Liza Dunn, but we got the band back together. We're like the Eagles. We're going on our fifth farewell tour. We've got Dr. Kevin Folta joining us. Kevin, most of the audience, no doubt, is familiar with you from your voluminous work in this science communication world. But we've picked up some new listeners since you moved on, so maybe you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. My name is Kevin Folta. I'm a professor at the University of Florida, and I've also been very active in science communication and at the forefront of public discussions of particularly controversial areas for probably going on 30 years now. And one of the areas I work in is I'm a molecular biologist by training. So I know DNA, I know RNA, I know transgenic plants, and I've been excited about everything from insulin made in bacteria through GMO plants and all that good stuff. And I say genetically engineered plants for a very long time. And I've been so happy to help diffuse some of the BS information around them over the last whatever it's been. And with that has come many arrows in my back and a few backstabbing knives in my back from science communication folks, and a lot of issues that really that led me to many watersheds about just quitting. But it's too important for us to keep going. So that's why I'm here, and I host the Talking Biotech podcast going into its 11th year, so 10 years in June, and used to host Science, Facts, and Fallacies with with Cameron. So if you go back through the archives, you can hear us talk about COVID-19 and things like that.
Everything. I mean, the range of topics we've covered, I don't even want to figure out the scope because it's so extensive. But your latest offering, which was also published by GLP, as this podcast is a story you co-authored with John Entine, who founded the GLP. And this is called New Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr., America's Health, Food, and Farming Nightmare Begins. All right, real subtle headline there, Dr. Folta. So, we were just talking about this a minute ago, right? Like the baseline for this conversation is Kennedy is a nutter, he's a kook, he hates science, he's going to make your children sick. Or, on the opposite side, this is like a prophet who came down directly from heaven and he's going to spread the health gospel. And there seems to be very little helpful information coming out about what might happen. And I think you start to, and again, in fairness, we don't know that much. It's only been a little while. So he hasn't done a ton of stuff yet. But I think you're sort of getting at the core issues. Like, what is he actually going to do with agricultural policy? So maybe we can start there. Based on what you're seeing from him, what do you think is coming?
Well, maybe the best thing we can start with is some silver linings. And I think one of the things that we've learned from this is that there's no such thing as a psychic. It reaffirms the idea that there is nobody that in the beginning of 2024 said that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Democratic lawyer, environmental lawyer, would somehow find himself in charge of, and I left out anti-vaxxer and ag policy nut, would find himself at the helm of the HHS, which oversees many different agencies, including the FDA and CDC and all those stuff. So we know that. But what is the major anticipation of where we're going? And the thing about this can be best framed if we look at some of the videos he's released when he says, I've made a commitment to study chronic disease in children, and we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to figure it out. And I sit back and say, we have so many dedicated people who've dedicated their lives to figuring it out. And those folks just had their budgets cut. They're like the real folks who know how to do this. And when I see Kennedy and what was his former running mate, Shanahan?
Nicole Shanahan.
Offering millions of dollars in grants to, and it's said in her tweet, we're offering grant money to people who will show what the effects of these things are. So in other words, they're starting with a conclusion. And that's the big problem with Kennedy. He's starting with the conclusion that agricultural chemistry, food dyes, food additives, seed oils, all these kind of fringe areas are what is driving chronic disease. And what's really driving chronic disease is the fact that we've been able to get rid of acute disease. Right? I mean, the fact that we're not dying of infectious disease as much. Heart disease is being mitigated. Colon cancer is caught early. Breast cancer screenings are good. We've done so much to mitigate dying from the easy ones that all of us are more likely to have a complicated neurodegenerative disease or crazy cancer as time goes on. Something's going to get you. And eventually it's going to be either an accident or chronic weird problems, right? So, that's kind of my stepping off point. I think we're just looking at science backwards. And to me, that's an incredible problem.
He has a lot of libertarian fans, as I think you've realized too. This like goofy Maha coalition. It's like the far left types that hate pharma, and then it's the far right types. And I don't mean either of those as pejoratives. I think it's an accurate descriptor of where they lie on the spectrum of political thought. You have these people, they distrust the FDA. Anything big, in essence, is bad. But one thing they seem to have put on the back burner is this idea that the government can actually fix these problems. So, for example, it was the mid-1980s, I think, Ron Paul, who was a forever member of Congress and is also a physician, he was arguing, I think it was the Phil Donahue show or something, and this guy was arguing with him about his politics. And Ron Paul looked at the guy and he said, well, you're kind of overweight. Maybe the government should put you on a diet. And his whole point was the government can't make you thin, right? That's not its job. There's all these things it can't do. So I guess what my question is, in a very roundabout way, how successful, even on his own terms, can he be, right? So if he bans another food dye or, he gets the seed oils out of McDonald's French fries, like that's not going to... the French fries aren't going to magically become a health food, right? You're not going to lose weight if you eat the same number of them, regardless of what they're fried in. So do you have any thoughts on that? Can he actually succeed at the things he's claiming he wants to achieve?
Right. Well, that's exactly the problem, is that he's shooting arrows in the wrong direction. And that science as it existed and as we were progressing and as scientists under NIH, NSF guidance were doing, we're looking at the core causes of chronic disease and childhood illness. This is what we do every day in science. The problem that we're up against now is that somebody else who says, I think I can do it better because all of you are bought off by somebody because your data don't match my conclusion. And so now we find ourselves in this weird situation. They are going to, and he's even said, we're going to take our view off of cancer and other areas, and we're going to focus more on these other areas for a while. We can't do that as a country. And maybe I'm drifting a little bit here, but as a semi-relevant plant scientist, my email box is full, or was, not anymore, was full of people from Sri Lanka and Nepal and China and Japan and Taiwan saying, could I come to your lab and work? And so we were a destination. We were a place where people would come to study and then maybe go back home and work. And with the recent changes, I think we really have knocked ourselves down. So to answer your question, I really think that taking the focus off of where we were in pursuit of problems and moving in a properly evidence-based guided timeline into this, all right, well, let's just throw that out. Let's start with our conclusion and see what evidence we can find to support it. And I think this is where he's totally off track.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the trick that no one's really going to be able to figure out is you have to get millions of people to make better decisions. And that requires motivations that you can't supply them. I think that's right. I think that's important. You know what I mean? So he can make all of these superficial changes, but they don't really work, right? And the funny thing is the thing that does work, like, a drug like Ozempic or any of these GLP-1 agonists, he frowns on them, and yes. You hear people like, Callie Means, who I just can't stand, who strikes me as the phoniest, self-righteous, moralistic dweeb, and I just can't stand the guy. he goes on TV and he talks about, how we're going to put everyone on we're going to put kids on Ozempic and they're just trying to make money. It's like, obviously maybe this shouldn't be the frontline approach to treating weight loss in young children. Point granted, and I think most physicians who work in obesity medicine would agree with that. But at the same time, it's like the one thing that is actually making a dent in the obesity numbers in a meaningful way, in that it's helping people make long-term dietary and exercise changes. You're going to attack this. You've already signaled that you're against it. So that's the part that's frustrating to me, is that they point out a real problem, and sometimes they're right? Obesity, very serious problem. But then they go on and they go, well, we're going to make the thing that's most effective in the history of forever harder to access, or what are your thoughts on that? Not just they're attacking things that work, is basically.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. Is that that for them they see that the culprit is. So let's look at the entire mess. What is the real reason that people are obese, or that we have an epidemic of diabetes, or that we've got issues with certain types of cardiovascular disease? All these things he's calling chronic diseases, and he's focusing on pesticides in your carrots, and pesticides and food dyes and all that. Because I is off the ball. 80% of Americans don't eat enough fruits and vegetables, which have been well linked to defraying incidence of long-term degenerative disease. People don't get enough fiber. They don't get the correct amounts of many different vitamins. They don't get enough exercise. We live sedentary lives. People are therefore, because of those kinds of lifestyle decisions, overweight, and sugar in everything. There's sugar in salad dressing. You think you're eating yourself a healthy salad, and you're eating 10 tablespoons of sugar. There's all of these things are contributing, and if we really wanted to fix it, we would do what Michelle Obama said. What was it, 15, 20 years ago now? I don't even know. Back 2016, 2017. Her mantle was, we're going to fix this by getting kids to move. We're going to fix this by having, encouraging better diets. And she was poo-pooed out the door as a nanny state liberal, and by the same folks who are now saying the Maha thing is a great thing. So a lot of those fossils are still around. And that's not a partisan statement. That's a statement of where we were when it was ridiculed, and now how it's being embraced. The idea of prioritizing healthiness. The other funny part about this is that when you look at folks like Callie Means and Vani Hari and all these folks, they're all selling something right on their website, and a lot of it is unregulated supplements. And then at the same time, you've got folks like RFK Jr. who are calling for more regulation of the things that are not the problem. So we're going to ban pesticides, ban food dyes, ban this stuff. That's not the problem. You're taking your eye off the ball. At the same time, the people who support him are running empires, getting rich on selling unregulated medical nostrums. There are so many weird branches of hypocrisy. I wish we had 5 hours today.
But that's the thing that gets me, is that a lot of the people that are embracing him are critics of the tort industry, and they've been calling for tort reform for decades. And as you alluded to, they whine about federal regulation, sometimes with good reason. But on this stuff, all of a sudden they're just throwing their weight behind this guy. I just find that fascinating, So like he'll go on a podcast and he'll say Africa grows GMO crops, and then they try to export them to Europe, and Europe won't take them, and that's terrible for Africa. Now the part he leaves out is that he lobbied alongside of this whole host of characters to keep biotech crops out of Europe. Yep. So it's the classic example that I think we've talked about a lot over the years. It's like you rig the game, and then you go, look, the game isn't working. It's like, well,
yeah. It's the you put the banana peel on the top of the staircase and then complain that too many people are falling down the stairs.
Right.
And that's been a thing with a lot of the anti-genetic engineering media, who kind of set it up and then knock it down and then report that look what happened over here. But this is the main issue. Kennedy has made a living of identifying a potential problem and then developing the rhetoric around it to make it compelling to influence a jury of 12. Now he's tried to influence a jury of 150 million, and he got enough people to be able to stand with for what he's claiming to fix to get into this kind of powerful position. The problem now becomes, because he's been hanging with folks like Zen Honeycutt and Vani Hari, all the people we've made fun of over the last 20 years as being scientifically void are now in his left and right ear talking to the worm. And he's going to be making his decisions not based upon science and evidence and all the stuff that we've now shunned, but instead focusing on what these people think the problem is.
So, when it comes to specifics, what I'm concerned about, and again, I haven't seen much because he's very clever, right? So the things he's saying are popular with a lot of people on the left and right, So I think HHS just put out a statement on biological sex, saying there's only two sexes. That resonates with a lot of people. During his confirmation hearing, he talked about restoring transparency to the federal health bureaucracy. Everyone, I think in principle, at least agrees with that, right? Transparency is good. Saving money where you can is good. So he's starting out with things that I think are making him look more reasonable than he actually is. But when it comes to policy, I'm concerned that what he might do is implement a new rule or something at EPA that would make it easier for NGOs to sue a pesticide manufacturer or to gum up a new product in litigation. Those are the kind of things I'm worried about. They're not sexy. They don't make for interesting news, and so people don't really talk about them. But as you well know, that could have a very serious impact on food production. So maybe talk about that if you have any thoughts.
Well, and that makes it a little bit more challenging because I'm a little bit unsure of how HHS and agencies under HHS, including the FDA, can articulate with what happens to EPA and USDA, which are separate agencies. But one of the big things he says he's going, and he said this on one of his videos, I'm going to offer farmers, and I almost said it like him, sound like Katharine Hepburn, I'm going to offer farmers an off-ramp to stop doing what they do and give them an opportunity to do it the way that we think you should do it. And this is, red flags. He thinks there should be more small and medium-sized farms, that kind of thing, which as someone who family is involved in a small farm, that all right, cool by me, send me a new high tunnel. But his ideas around farming are completely insane. The fact that he is against genetically engineered seeds, which seems to be I don't know how much he's actually come out and said that, but the comments against seed oils are really a thinly veiled anti-genetic engineering statement. The statements about glyphosate, which we can get to in a minute, where I can talk, chapter and verse about his views on glyphosate. But his whole mantra about food and farming is really scary because he like you say, he bases it on we need healthy people, or healthy kids. Everybody agrees. We're all on board. So how do we get there? And that's the problem. He thinks that the problem is on the farm, is in the pharma, and that's why we have a problem.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. He doesn't have control over EPA or USDA, but FDA reviews actual food products. So I could see him doing something similar in that realm, right? So a company could want to introduce, I'm trying to think, an example escapes me, like some biotech product, or that's derived from genetically engineered plants. And then he could say, well, you have to stand on your right foot and put a hat on your head, and only when the sun's coming in from this direction. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You could just make it a pain in the ass to get a new product on the market. And the company won't have a choice except to comply, because when a federal agency tells you it's a good idea to do something, they're not really asking. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. I mean, look at the aqua advantage salmon. I mean, that legislation or the package that was looking for a final signature from President Obama sat on his desk for 5 years. And this is because of pressure from various organizations. You have the opportunity to delay things by putting barriers in the way, which maybe as long as I'll get to it tomorrow. It happens on both sides of the aisle, and and he's in a position to do that here. And it can be a question of changing thresholds or urging a change in thresholds that are detectable. That what you and I know are next to nothing under most USDA and government guidelines. The Environmental Working Group certainly feels very differently, and they have his ear. And maybe there's a way that we can get those moved down a bit. And so he may not have direct ability to change these things, but by being in a cabinet position, he has direct influence on those who can make those changes. And as we've seen so far in the first month of the administration, is you do it my way or it's the highway. So I think he will be playing by the rules, and I mean, in a way, maybe that's a little contradictory as I think about it. But bottom line is that he'll be doing whatever he wants to do, and it's going to happen.
So you draw the comparison, you and John draw the comparison to Trofim Lysenko, who was an infamous agricultural scientist, and I use that term loosely because he was trying to apply the ideas of Marxism to agriculture, which is a very strange, it's strange like in the abstract, but then the practical result, as you say, millions of deaths, like deliberate famine imposed on people. It's just a level of cruelty it's hard to imagine. And I guess I don't know what I'm saying here. I want to be careful, but would it take people having to experience real suffering because of the policies that he's promoting for people to go, wait a minute, maybe this was bad? Like, I don't want that to happen, to be clear. But at this point, I don't know how else you get people to realize that this guy is jeopardizing their welfare while telling them he's doing them a favor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know where that line will be, but I got a feeling he's going to go after glyphosate with both barrels. He's already been on Joe Rogan and disparaged the compound. I've completely debunked that on an episode of Talking Biotech of July of 23. He doesn't know what he's talking about, but he is convinced that this is a basis of modern disease. And I would not doubt that this is kind of near the top of his priorities, and also aligns with what Vani Hari and what's her name, Zen Honeycutt, have been screaming for a long time. So I think that this is going to be near the top. And farmers use this compound. We know its limitations. We know its relative risks, which are extremely small. And I think that when he starts going after those compounds and after genetically engineered seeds, if he has to do that, I think it's going to be glyphosate as a proxy for genetically engineered seeds. I think that there's going to all of a sudden be a little bit of an awakening of farmers that influence politicians in those flyover states. And I think that's where we'll start to really see a separation from, coalitions forming around farming. Say that 10 times fast. Where you get farmers who are saying to their representatives, I need your help here because he's going to take away a tool I use to stay in business and to make my farming profitable. And when a representative gets that from a few hundred farmers, a few thousand farmers, maybe they'll start to realize that they don't need to be in lockstep with the administration and that they're going to follow what their constituents say. So maybe that's the breaking point, but that's a big maybe because it sure seems to me that everybody's going along with the program.
Yeah, I think that we're still in that honeymoon phase. It's like post-election exuberance. Everyone's very excited and they think the world's going to be forever changed because their guy won. And it'll take a while for that to die down. But I think you get at a good point. And maybe this is the silver lining, is that Kennedy is in opposition to a lot of other influential members of this coalition that got Trump elected. So farmers are one. I think big companies are another. And so I wonder to what extent he's going to run up against other people who also have the president's ear who are saying, you got to tone this guy down. And so, for example, Trump actually said that on Joe Rogan. He said, we're going to let Bobby do this on pesticides and this on food, but he's not going to be able to touch oil and gas, for example. So
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if something like that could happen with other issues in the health and science space.
Yeah, I think so. Because it's one of these things where when he starts getting at the core of agriculture and starts tearing into that and presenting real ideas that are starting to restrict farmers' access to the tools that they want, that runs as a counter to everything the Republican Party has traditionally stood for. These are the folks of deregulation. These are the folks that make it better for farmers. These are the folks who take away the barriers. And all of a sudden, you got a guy, an environmental lawyer, a Kennedy environmental lawyer, who now wants to put some hurdles in your path. I really do think that this runs philosophically counter to what they've always stood for. And with that, maybe we'll start to see a little bit of gelling and a little bit of a few folks in Congress finally saying no.
Yeah, I'm encouraged. It was fun to watch his confirmation hearing because he's contradicted himself so many times over the years on everything from abortion to pharmaceuticals to, so people would just trot out a statement he made and they're like, a few years ago you said this and now you're saying the exact opposite. And his only play was to basically follow the administration's line and say, I support the president, blah, blah, blah. The states can do this, the government can do that, yada, yada, yada. So again, maybe this is just wishful thinking, but it seems to me that he realizes that he doesn't have carte blanche, that he has to play the game, and maybe those moderating influences will be good for all of us. I hope, fingers crossed.
That's all we can hope for, right? Is that at the end of the day that there's going to be some sort of rein in on the extremes. And whether that's about vaccination, whether that's about, glyphosate, whether it's about genetically engineered crops, whether it's about pesticides, whatever it's about, there eventually has to be an adult in the room, and that adult in the room is going to be time. And when we see, we're starting to see some unfortunate numbers with respect to avian influenza and degree of penetration in the livestock populations and showing up in 70 humans as a last count. As this starts to accelerate in the Health and Human Services Secretary and the FDA and the CDC are going to start to be facing serious questions about development of vaccines or deployment of vaccines. Last week, an avian influenza vaccine was approved, really under quiet, under the radar. I don't even know if you realize that, but they made a vaccine available last week, and we have tremendous stockpiles of vaccine for avian influenza. So this is all stuff under his guidance, and his hand may be forced before long to say, here is what we are going to advise. Because the minute he comes out and says, well, it's just a cold, we're not going to have a problem, and people start dying from this thing, maybe that would be something that would immediately steal the trust in his message. So we'll see where it goes.
Yes. Well, like I said, our fingers are crossed. Everyone go read Kevin's article. Pretty short too, which is quite an accomplishment for John Entine. So it's a solid story. So once again, it's called New Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. America's Health, Food, and Farming Nightmare Begins. That's at geneticliteracyproject.org. Kevin, as you said, Talking Biotech, still weekly podcast. Comes out every weekend, I think, right?
I try really hard. And the problem I'm up against is, I recently had my second kid, and he was in the NICU for 72 days. It was a big hassle to stay home with a 2-year-old, which I loved, but it's really tough. Real job, active farm. We're doing a lot of stuff. So it's really hard to get one out every week, but I really do give it a shot. I still love doing it. It's still an important vehicle. I am going to have more of a presence on Instagram with, and this has been another big turn, that the appointment of RFKJ, the current state of funding in academic research. All these things are topics that really have made me say I need to maybe step out of retirement a little bit here, SciComm retirement, and step a little harder into these discussions in the places where they're happening. So my OnlyFans page is no, I'm going to be doing more on Instagram, and the stuff may even invade TikTok, so teenagers can actually hear a grumpy 58-year-old guy at least put out a balanced message that'll help out a touch. So here we go.
You want to see Kevin's cantaloupes, $9.99 a month. Very good. Well,
and I grow cantaloupes, by the
way. Right, that's my point. You could just do a tour of your farm.
Yeah, no, it's the other day somebody. It's actually one of my first videos that's sitting here in the box. Someone accused me of being in the pocket of big pork, and I said, well, if anything, I'm in the pocket of small sausage. So there we go. But so there's lots of double entendre. There's lots of irony and jokes and witty banter going on to try to push back against the disinformation, which is what I've really dedicated a lot of time to in the last 20 years. And now I got to dial it up a notch, and I really don't want to, but we're going to do it.
Good stuff. All right. Well, just to be clear, Kevin doesn't have an OnlyFans. He does have an X. It's just at Kevin Folta. So go follow him. Talking Biotech is on every podcasting platform you use. As is this one. Follow us as well. It's at Dr. Liza MD, at KMJ English. And as always, we will be back next time. Thank you so much.
All right.